The NHL trade deadline is fast approaching, Friday, March 8th, and you're going to want to be following the SDPN because we have some excellent content lined up for you. No need to sit around in front of a TV all day. When a trade breaks, the SDP will be posting immediate reactions. Then after all the wheeling and dealing is done, stay tuned for our special SDP trade deadline review episode. And as always, the SDPN is where you need to be as the deadline approaches. The Chris Johnston Show is tapped into all of the latest rumblings, and Basu and Godin have all of your Montreal Canadiens updates. So tune in. Friday, March 8th, the NHL trade deadline is going to be a ton of fun, and the SDPN will be all over it. Follow us on socials, smash that subscribe button on YouTube, and get excited for some massive deals.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, let's talk about Elias Pettersson. We saw reports over the weekend that the Canucks were taking calls on him. People in Vancouver freaked out. There's been a lot of talk about Elias Pettersson and his future, but it seems as if the winds are changing a little bit. There's been reports now that significant progress has been made on a contract extension for Elias Pettersson. What can you tell us about Elias Pettersson, his contract situation, and the Vancouver Canucks?
Well, the biggest piece of progress is that he's willing to talk, because until now, where all the speculation emanates from ultimately is just this feeling of uneasiness or the unknown, because Elias Pettersson didn't want to engage in contract discussions through the season. And to be fair and to his credit, he's been consistent about that since last summer and hasn't changed his position, at least until the last 48 hours here. But the Canucks, I think we're getting uneasy with that wait. Obviously, it leads to media and fan speculation, lots of noise in the marketplace. We heard Rick Tocchet mention that he's a human being and might be weighing on him. And so, where the biggest piece of progress has happened is as of Tuesday night and into Wednesday, Elias Pettersson gave the green light to his agent to have a discussion with the Canucks and for them to engage on this extension. And the reason that alone is the piece of progress here is that I think the Canucks are highly motivated to get him signed. They're well aware of what the market for a player like him is. And there's no reason to think that with now some momentum going in the talks that they can't just run it across the finish line and basically take care of that big piece of business, which will secure a big chunk of the Canucks' future and amid this great season the team's having. I mean, obviously, from ownership on down, the Canucks want to have as few distractions as possible, want to put this team in the best position that it can be to have success. And, they've had a bit of a bumpy ride here since the All-Star break, at least compared to where they were ahead of time. But, I think they're still in great position to have a playoff run and, chase what they're trying to chase. So, I think that the breakthrough was the fact that Pettersson's willing to stay because, until he indicated a willingness to talk, as much as he could say publicly, I want to be here, I think that there's at least a question. Well, does he really want to be here? Is there an ulterior motive? That gets removed with his agents now at the bargaining table with the Canucks. And, they're going to make him a very rich man, I think, here in the next little while, if they're able to find agreement on this contract.
Exactly how rich, CJ?
Well, I'll point you to the William Nylander situation, and it's the same and different in equal parts. William Nylander was going to be an unrestricted free agent on July 1st until the Leafs signed him in January to his $11.5 million extension over 8 years. I think that that's a pretty good base starting point for where the Pettersson contract's going to go. What's a little different in an Elias Pettersson situation, and why I think he was saying, why do we need to rush through this, is next year is a restricted free agent year. The Canucks still own his rights for next year. He wasn't able to go to July 1st and just sign with any other team. I mean, he could sign an offer sheet, but of course, in that case, the Canucks could match. But, he didn't have the full UFA status. And those RFA years are valued differently when teams and agents hammer out these contracts. And so I think I'm pretty confident to say this contract's going to end up above the Nylander number. But how far above might be restricted a little bit because it's not a pure UFA deal. And so if you say the 7 years that are UFA years are valued at what, $12 million a year, maybe next year is valued at 10 or 10 and a half. So that's, $94 million over an 8-year contract. I mean, 11.75, 11.8, maybe he gets it to 12. I mean, certainly I think if the player has a specific number he's dying to get, he could get it there because I do think he's got a lot of leverage in this situation. He's having a great season. Obviously, the Canucks have been eager to get this thing done and get to, this big piece of business put to bed. So, I think it ends up above Nylander, but maybe not as far as some out there have said, because I think they're overlooking the fact it's not a pure UFA deal.
1 week away from the NHL trade deadline, do we expect any more business from Patrick Allvin?
I think it's possible, certainly. I mean, the Canucks were among the teams, I think, that were keeping tabs on Chris Tanev before he was traded to Dallas. I don't think that they're in a position. There's been, some reports linking them to Jake Gensel. It doesn't seem like they're as locked in on upgrading one specific aspect of the roster. Keep in mind, they still got Phil Kessel skating in Abbotsford, and I believe he's likely to sign a contract with the team. So they're certainly looking for every little bit that they can find improvement. And I suppose that would be the answer from just about any team this time of year that's headed for the playoffs. But I think in Vancouver in particular, they really want to make sure that they're in the best position possible to have a long playoff run. I mean, they've already made 2 reasonably significant trades, getting Zadorov back in December and then the Elias Lindholm trade over the All-Star break. And so I don't know how active they'll be. I mean, look, if they're able to get a new contract done with Pettersson, that's probably business enough for that organization. I think that they'll be pretty pleased if that gets put to rest and put to bed now. I mean, it gives them some longer term, security too, or at least clarity, maybe is the better way to put it. If they do sign them to an 8-year deal, they just have a better idea of where their cap's going to be next year. In a lot of ways, teams like to get these things done as quick as possible. I think with their best players, with their star players, obviously just, it ensures that you have the core of a good team in place, but I think it also allows you to make other decisions down their lineup and roster moving forward. So, the short answer is yes, I think the Canucks will be kicking around all these players. I mean, what's interesting, and we can dive into this a little bit more, is the trade market itself hasn't really taken shape yet. Right. And so I think teams like the Canucks are smart to stay in the conversations just in case maybe some of the prices don't end up being as high as what we've seen in past years or what we're anticipating heading into March 8th. And maybe there's a way to add a good player and you're not giving up quite the number of assets you would have thought. I mean, I would say on the surface, that's what it looks like in Dallas for the Chris Tanev acquisition. I mean, from the Stars' perspective, not giving up a first-round pick. They gave up their second-round pick in 2024, but they're one of the better teams in the league. So that's a pick that's going to fall, somewhere between 50 and 64, basically. And, they gave up a 4th-round pick to New Jersey in order to have the contract, the salary be reduced twice. And the prospect. I mean, it's really not a whole lot if you're on the Dallas end of it. And I know we'll dig into this. I'm not being critical of the Flames. I think there's another argument for why this is not a bad deal for the Flames, but certainly where the market for a guy that's been 1 or 2 on our trade boards all year long since they launched in November, it's really not a huge return. Maybe that's a sign that we won't see quite as many first rounders change hands at this deadline. I think there was 12 first rounders in the run up to last year's deadline. I'd be shocked if we saw that many change hands. And so teams like the Canucks or, the Bruins, I'm just top teams that maybe are a little worried about giving up too many assets or wondering about what they have left, might be able to swoop in here and get to some upgrades a little cheaper, depending how the market goes. I mean, it's still, as I say, it's not fully formed, even though we're within 8 days now of the actual trade deadline. It's just not clear, if the leverage is with the buyers or the sellers. I mean, on one hand, I'd say the buyers have a fair amount of leverage, but who knows? Maybe none of these teams on the bubble will end up selling this, the Seattles, the Pittsburghs, maybe some of these other teams will just say, hey, we're not selling. And then, then the prices go up. I mean, that's part of what we'll be watching closely here in these coming days.
Let's get into it because CJ was already alluding to the details. The Chris Tanev trade that sends him from Calgary to New Jersey, then Dallas. We'll focus more on the Calgary-Dallas portion of it. We know New Jersey will retain some salary as a part of this trade, but Chris Tanev going to Dallas with a 2024 second-round pick going to Calgary, as well as a conditional 3rd in 2026, and left-handed defenseman Artem not left-handed, left-shot defenseman Artem Grishnikov, which Craig Conroy very much into this player, young prospect, a Dallas Stars draft pick. He's obviously at the center of this deal.
He is, and he'll probably be the deciding factor if we look back in 5 or 10 years and whether this was a good trade. And look, we have to brand winners and losers. We do trade grades in real time. We'll have winners and losers on March 9th. I'm sure you'll see that at The Athletic and many other of our competitors' sites. but it's really hard to know. I'd say on the surface, it is an underwhelming return because we know Craig Conroy was in the marketplace looking for a first round pick. Multiple teams were told by the Flames that I'm aware of that they were going to need a first rounder in order to make a Tanev deal. And ultimately he makes a deal for a second rounder. Now, in addition to that, he's going to get this prospect. And I'm not certainly, I've never seen him play. I'm not Scott Wheeler, and I can't really comment too much on the specifics of whether that was a good decision or not. But if he becomes a player, you'll probably look favorably upon this return. If he doesn't, we'll probably look back and be like, well, it could have been a little bit more, but the market didn't yield that. I suppose there could be questions about whether the Flames should have waited a little bit longer to pull the trigger. But, one thing I've been consistent in saying all along is you can't be dealing with multiple big files on March 8th itself. Like with Noah Hannafin still there, with maybe some other decisions pending, there is kind of an order of events where it's beneficial, I think, to, basically move off the player and then, start fresh on the next file, because obviously you're dealing with multiple teams, multiple different dynamics with each potential trade. And so, yeah, it's I think that trade will be, I don't even want to say won or lost, but I think it'll be dictated how successful it was based on where the prospect ends up. And, that's where Craig Conroy's got to rely on his scouts and those that have been watching this player play, in for the Texas Stars. He's in his first year of professional hockey. Obviously, the Flames would have a book on him because he was only drafted in 2021 from their amateur side as well. And I think that's where it comes down to. I mean, it's so easy to say, a team got a bunch of first rounders in a trade. That's a home run. But quite often, if you go look back at what those trades become, I was looking at the Montreal trade to Florida with Ben Sherratt. It ended up being the 31st overall pick. And that pick's only just been made. So I don't know if it was a successful one for Montreal and a prospect that doesn't look like is going to amount to much for the Canadiens. So on the surface, the Canadiens got more for Sherratt who was, an expiring contract, similar type of player, maybe to Tanev a couple of years ago at the deadline. But I'm not sure the return ends up being all that much better, especially if Calgary gets a player out of it in this prospect. So that's one way to look at it. And I can see why maybe there's some people questioning the decision, but at a certain point, I mean, it's been no, how do I put this best? It's been no secret that Chris Tanev was available. Though obviously there's been a lot of discussions to get to this point, and Craig Conroy went with the best deal he felt he had. We should mention though, the Toronto Maple Leafs probably could have made a better trade, maybe on paper, but I just wonder if, in this case, that the Flames aren't too eager to deal with Toronto. If there's maybe a little of a Brad Treliving tax placed on any player that the Leafs might acquire from Calgary.
I've been wondering, and maybe this is just because of the fact that we're on separate coasts. I've been wondering if the Edmonton Oilers were that interested in flipping a first round pick for Chris Tanev. It's not that clear to me at this moment right now, but could you imagine if Craig Conroy imagine all these teams that shown interest in Chris Tanev, and the only team that's willing to give you a first round pick is your provincial rival. What do you do in that situation? I wonder how many teams were actually willing to flip that first round pick.
I don't know that Edmonton was going to go there with a first rounder. My sense is the Oilers are going to trade their first round pick, but it's going to be for help at forward. And so I'd be surprised if again, it's not that they don't like the player. I just don't know that from an asset management standpoint, that was going to make sense. I mean, ironically, there's always an Alberta tax. I mean, there's a reason why you don't, and it's a tax-free province. But there's a reason we don't see a lot of Calgary Edmonton trades over the years. There's been a small handful, but it's pretty rare. I mean, similar to Toronto and Ottawa or Toronto, Montreal. I mean, you don't see a lot of big Ranger Islander deals. I mean, it's kind of a funny thing. As much as there's 32 teams, there's a lot of different personalities involved. There's those kind of regional things involved. There's ownership involved. And so it's not always just what is the absolute best return. I think that there's a few caveats built in there. And it just seems like, because the Leafs did have such, long conversations actually on Nikita Zadorov too, going back to before he was dealt to Vancouver. And then, the price on Tanev, the Leafs were told was, a first rounder or maybe one of their top prospects, like a Fraser Minton or Easton Cowan. And, ultimately on paper anyway, it looks like this is maybe a slightly weaker return. Look, that's the prerogative. I mean, the Flames had a long history with Brad Treliving. He left on his own volition, and maybe there might be some feelings left over somewhere in that building.
I mean, if it's at that point and it's keeping you from making a return like that, I gotta say, that's a tough pill to swallow for Flames fans. Could you? I mean, no
Well,
shade to the prospect that they ended up getting, but
I got to
could
say,
you imagine if that was actually on the table?
it sounds like that was the price that was put to the Leafs. I don't think the Leafs didn't meet that price. It's not as though the Leafs offered their top prospect and a first round pick or anything like that.
Right.
It's that we should be very clear on that. The Leafs, they
Yes.
didn't put an offer on the table that was clearly better, but they were sort of led to believe the price was going to be more than what it ended up being. And they might not be alone in that. Look, ultimately, it sounds like Dallas was very aggressive on the Tanev file, going back weeks. And, the Flames prioritized that potential deal, got a lot of eyes on the Dallas prospects and as they work through the trade conversations, and ultimately he ends up a Star. I mean, look I think he's a perfect fit for what the Stars need. They certainly need help on their right side. He's an improvement on what they've had kind of in their middle pair, bottom pairing. And this is a team that, isn't that far removed from a cup final run. I know it was in the bubble. We all kind of forget it, but it was only a couple of years ago, and then obviously played in the Western Conference final last year, and has star quality players at every position. So Dallas, I think this is a very smart swing by Jim Nill, and he didn't have a lot of cap room to work with, but managed to fit Chris Tanev's deal in there, and I think that it just makes a lot of sense from his end.
So Craig Conroy doesn't get a first round pick for Chris Tanev. Brad Treliving gets to keep his for now. Ken Holland gets to keep his for now. Maybe that goes for Jake Gensel. So maybe Craig Conroy gets that first round pick for Noah Hanifin. What about him?
It sounds like it's a little quiet with Hanifin in the moment. That's not a prediction that nothing's going to happen or anything. I mean, there's still lots of time here for the market to develop, but his situation is kind of unique in that he's younger than Chris Tanev. Obviously he and the Flames had talked about an extension quite extensively. And so, I think it's reasonable to think that a trade involving Hanifin might have an extension as part of it, kind of like we saw with Hampus Lindholm a couple of years ago when he got traded from Anaheim to Boston and promptly signed an 8-year deal. Wouldn't surprise me if similar machinations happened in the Hanifin case. And so it's not as maybe easy of a trade, a little bit more mechanics behind the scenes that need to fall into place. I've reported that the Tampa Bay Lightning have been interested. I still believe that to be the case now. The Boston Bruins, I think, have kicked around on Hanifin. Sounds like a couple other teams as well. And certainly if a team is acquiring Noah Hanifin with an understanding or even with an actual contract in place, a sort of sign and trade kind of scenario, I would think at minimum you're talking about a first round pick coming back plus a bit more asset wise. And so, that's really the biggest domino left to play here. It seems like maybe the window of opportunity with Jacob Markstrom and a possible deal is kind of gone. I suppose it could be revived, still a week and change here for someone else to get serious on that file and maybe give Calgary something to think about. But Hanifin is the last major piece of the puzzle, who is a pending UFA. And, maybe a larger point we should underline here is Craig Conroy was consistent, Julian, as you would know, right from the start of training camp. He wasn't going to let anyone walk away from the team that certainly among his most valuable potential UFAs. And now, he's traded 3 of those players. And I think Hanifin will be the 4th out the door, prior to the deadline, even though the Calgary has played well. I mean, since the Lindholm trade, they've put a lot of points in the bank and, hung in there in the Western Conference wildcard race. It's not inconceivable that they make the playoffs even after these trades. I know that sounds a little, it sounds like it's incongruent, doesn't make sense, but I mean, the way the Flames have played, it's hard for me to say they're not going to make the playoff, but clearly management hasn't been swayed by the recent results and is looking at the bigger picture.
If you account for Craig Conroy's work in the summer, you have to account for Tyler Toffoli getting moved as well, where they got Yegor Sharangovich and a draft pick. There's been a handful of pending UFAs gone, and Noah Hanifin obviously stands to be the next one in line on that one. One other question I want to ask, not to leap back into the Toronto Maple Leafs, but with Chris Tanev off the board, are they still looking for a right shot D? Who else could they be pursuing?
Yes. I mean, there is not a right shot D on the planet they haven't considered. It's a very glaring need in the Leafs lineup. It's been exacerbated of late because Timothy Liljegren's missed some time. He's a right shot on the team with an undisclosed upper body injury. Connor Timmins, another right shot, is out with mono. And so the Leafs in their most recent game against Vegas on Tuesday drafted a lineup with 6 left shot defensemen in it. And Sheldon Keefe, prior to the game, even before seeing the result, which ended up as a 6-2 loss, said, I don't like this. He's of the mind that it's, a very difficult thing for the team to overcome. And obviously Sheldon wasn't speaking out of turn there. I mean, he knows what the Leafs priorities have been. At times, I think the Leafs have been considering even adding 2 defensemen. I'm not sure if that's still going to be the case, but certainly one defenseman who can play the right side, preferably someone who can play alongside Morgan Rielly, I think would be the preference, because, TJ Brody has done that so admirably for years in Toronto. And this year he just has not had as much success. He is a left shot who's very comfortable on the right side historically, but his results have not been there when he's played on the right side of Morgan Rielly this year. Whereas, when Rielly was out with that recent suspension on the left side, Brody and Liljegren as a pairing performed very well. So I think the Leafs feel as though if they could find someone to play alongside Morgan Rielly, kind of like they did at last year's deadline, it ended up being Luke Shen, which most people wouldn't have predicted, but that ended up being a dynamite pairing for them in the playoffs. And so that's where the Leafs are at. So who are they looking at? I mean, the obvious right shot defensemen that are still out there include Sean Walker from Philadelphia, Matt Dumba in Arizona. I should mention both Philadelphia and Arizona wanted a first round pick for those players. I wonder if that market changes now that you have the Tanev price in. And so it could even change the math in Philadelphia. I'll say this, that the Flyers, as much as like Calgary have been committed to selling, if you're only getting a second back for Sean Walker, you're in a wild card spot as of today. Maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe that return, you just think, you know what, we're wiser to keep him, have him as kind of an own rental situation. I mean, this is the sort of ways the market could shift here in this last week or 8 days before the deadline. Keep your eye on Ilya Lyubushkin, who the Leafs, acquired a couple of years ago. Oh man, I'm getting a call from a GM. Straight to voicemail. That's rough.
Wow, you just put him to voicemail? Jeez.
Well, what do I do? We're recording.
Okay, are you allowed to tell us who the GM is?
No, that's not fair.
Okay, all right. I thought it was worth asking. I thought it was worth asking.
The person's doing me a favor by returning a call, so I don't need to be putting the receipts out online right away.
We're going to throw that into one of the many mysteries of this show, right up there with Jeff Carter's middle name, which GM tried to call CJ during a recording.
But, when it comes to the Leafs, yes. I mean, certainly I would be stunned if we got to, 3:05 Eastern time on March 8th and they didn't have at least one more defenseman capable playing the right side on their blue line in the fold. So, who that's going to be, I think, is still a bit of a mystery box. And I think the Leafs would love to maybe get even a player with some term. It would be great if they could get, Pry and Adam Larson out of Seattle, or maybe even a David Savard out of Montreal. But, at this point, it's just not totally clear that those players are going to be available. And so, that's what Brad Treliving and his staff are working through right now, is just making the best decision. And they are not keen on giving up a first rounder if they don't have to. And the problem they have is they don't have a second rounder in this draft, the next draft, or the one after that. And so, they might end up shopping in the bargain bin, or they might have to part with one of their top prospects sort of in place of a first round pick. And so that's kind of where the dynamic is right now in Toronto.
We might as well make this Leafs corner, because I have Sheldon Keefe questions.
All right.
Specifically with him getting the game misconduct earlier this week against the Vegas Golden Knights. I saw a little bit of the media availability afterward where he was asked about getting ejected, and he did not want to talk about that. No, sir. He'll be getting fined, right? That's what we should be expecting with him.
I would expect so. I mean, the league in September had all the head coaches at the GM's meeting in Chicago just before training camp. They showed a montage of about 20 clips of coaches losing their mind on referees, the sort of stuff that goes viral on social media or is frankly kind of funny depending where you're sitting. But the league made it clear that they don't find it funny, and that they don't think it's in anyone's best interest to have coaches melting down on referees, dropping multiple F-bombs, what have you. What's interesting about Sheldon is certainly he can run a little bit hot, and he's been fined once in the past in 2022 for some, the way he went at referees in a game in St. Louis just after Christmas time. But in this case, by the standards of what we call a meltdown, I would say it wasn't really a meltdown, but clearly he had some choice words. He didn't like a penalty call on Mitch Marner late in that game against Vegas, and he was ejected from the game. And so this crackdown has happened this year. Greg Cronin was thrown out of a game. The Anaheim head coach in late October, he was fined $25,000. Prior to be firing in Edmonton, actually, Jay Woodcroft was ejected from a game in Vancouver for yelling at the referees. And I believe he was going to be fined. And the only reason he wasn't is unfortunately he was fired a couple days later before that fine came down. And so he was spared by losing his job, so to speak. In Sheldon's case, I'd be surprised if he wasn't fined, although, as of our recording now, nothing has been announced from the league. But it just seems to point in that direction because I think the league really is trying to send a message about keeping things civil between coaches and officials. And maybe I bet I would say this. I haven't spoken to Sheldon, but I bet what he would say to you is he's in a disadvantaged position because there's more cameras in Toronto. There's obviously more spotlight when these issues happen with him. I'm sure we could find multiple instances this year with relative ease where coaches have been far more animated on a bench for another team that maybe doesn't get as much media attention, and those coaches weren't fined.
What I was just going to say is maybe the next phone call you'll get will be from the Department of, well, you wouldn't say player safety. Well, I guess the Coaches Association or something. I'm not sure.
Yes.
All right, stay close to your phone, CJ. One more trade thing, actually. I realized in that situation, I was either going to be hopping from Leafs to other stuff or trades to other stuff. I decided for the Leafs corner option. What about the New York Rangers? Let's do a pulse check on them. That's a team that's been looking for a center. They have at least been linked from when Elias Lindholm was available. Obviously, the caliber of options not the same on the trade deadline now, but who could they be looking at?
Well, I think that they're looking at some of the bigger names on the trade board. It was noted that Pat Verbeek attended a Rangers game here in the last 24 hours. And I don't think, as much as I would caution on a previous episode about making too many conclusions about who's scouting which games. I mean, look, the Ducks have two pretty attractive forwards in Adam Henrique and Frank Vatrano. Henrique is a pending UFA, can play some center. I think certainly has some interest from the Rangers end. And Vatrano, someone who's played for the Rangers before, is having a great season. I mean, maybe a little bit below the radar on a national level, but 26 goals this season already. Always been a great finisher and someone I think that fit in well in his previous tenure in New York and could make sense for them coming back. They're certainly, though, I think going to add a forward at this deadline. At least one. And look, that's kind of in the DNA of the Rangers. I mean, last year they got Tarasenko and Kane. I don't know that those fit quite as well as they'd hope, but I mean, this is a team that's just won a ton of games lately. You'd put in the class of that group that could, get it together and win the whole thing. And so, I'd look for that Ducks connection to be pretty strong because, there's not a ton of names beyond that. I think more interesting name to other teams, I can't connect them directly to the Rangers. I don't know where they stand on the player. Is Tyler Toffoli's name is emerged here in recent days as someone who might be available with the Devils, kind of falling adrift of a playoff spot. They did have a big win in San Jose a couple nights ago, but I think that once this California trip is completed, Tom Fitzgerald is going to take a real hard look at his team and decide maybe as much as they had higher hopes for this year and they do have tons of cap space. I mean, look, they were the third party team in the Calgary Dallas trade. Picked up a 4th round pick for their trouble. Maybe it makes sense to trade a player like Toffoli, who's having a great season for them, a player they really like. And so I know some other teams that have been scouting the forward market pretty heavily like the idea of a Toffoli. And so maybe I just wonder, I don't know if the Devils and Rangers are subject to that same intrastate or intra-market tax, but maybe he could be someone they'd look at. But I certainly think it's makes sense to connect the Rangers to the top forwards available. And it does seem like there's something cooking there with the players in Anaheim.
That'd be really interesting with Tyler Toffoli, who began last summer, was in Calgary. It seemed like he wanted to stay, but didn't get the contract demands he wanted. He wanted to stay there long-term. It seems like flipped to New Jersey. Could you imagine him going to a New York Rangers squad or just somewhere else?
Well,
that is an interesting last 12 months.
Even
if it gets to that
and not
point.
to pivot back, but if it ends up being Adam Henrique, I mean, a lot of Devils fans still remember Adam Henrique pretty fondly, right? And they would probably be weird for them to see him in a Rangers sweater. So I mean, that's kind of the reality of where we're at. I mean, in Toffoli's case, the Devils really like the player. They've actually had some discussions with his agent about a possible contract extension. I think it's just you get to this point and you're looking at the math and there's all kinds of reasons the team's underperformed, whether it's goaltending, whether it's the injuries they've faced. But if you're realistic, it's like, okay, do we keep, if we keep him, what are our odds of getting in? If we trade him, maybe they get a first round pick. Right. And I think that the Devils are not, I don't think it's unrealistic to think that Toffoli could yield a first round pick at this point in time. And that might actually have more value just in this moment with where the Devils find themselves. And I think that's what they're wrestling with. I don't get the sense as of this moment that they've decided 100%. They haven't declared him available, but they're certainly thinking down those lines. They've received interest from teams, and, you know, they've got a game in Anaheim and Los Angeles here in the next few days. And I think once they get through that stretch and look where they're at, you know, they're going to have to make a determination 100% one way or the other.
Anyone else bubbling under with a week to go ahead of the trade deadline that we should be looking at? Trying to squeeze out as much as I can on that.
I want to give you more juice. I mean, look, I'd say look at a team like Seattle. You know, it sounds like what they've been telling their players that are pending UFAs is, you know, if we're in this race, we're not trading any of you. But, you know, they've fallen back a little bit. I mean, it's so tight in the West. Like I'm not declaring them out by any means. I mean, they have a game in hand on a couple of the teams above them. You know, they're chasing a pack that includes Minnesota, St. Louis, Calgary. You know, Nashville's surged here of late. So, you know, Seattle, I think, could be an interesting swing team, whether they trade their players or not. Because, you know, if they make their players available to market, you've got, you know, the likes of Alex Wenberg, Jordan Eberle, Thomas Tatar, maybe Justin Schultz. You know, those are all pending UFAs that they could move, and I think would spice up, you know, the available player pool a little bit. You know, Nashville is sort of an interesting case because, you know, I kind of had them as a selling team, but they've really surged ever since they canceled the concert trip to U2 to the Sphere. They've done nothing but win games and put points in the bank. And now all of a sudden, you know, Barry Trotz is saying UC Saros is essentially off the market. You know, his pending UFAs like Alexandre Carrière, another right shot defenseman that I know Toronto and other teams were looking at. Sounds like they're inclined to try to extend him rather than trade him. Tommy Novak, they're trying to extend now rather than trading. And so it's a weird deadline. This is a late developing deadline with a lot of teams that could go one way or the other. And so I don't have any more new names really to toss out there at this point in time. You know, we haven't talked about Max Pacioretty. I think, you know, there's some interest around him in Washington. And, you know, he's got the ability to control where he goes, and I don't think he'd go just anywhere, but maybe that's another player that, you know, seems to have gotten his feet under him a little bit after returning from, you know, his second Achilles surgery, that could move. But it's a tough deadline. It really is. Like, I don't want to, as much as I want you to watch Trade Center on Monday, Friday, March 8th, as much as I want you to keep listening to our shows. I mean, it's not as deep of a trade deadline as we've seen in the past. And I still think we'll see a volume of trades. I just don't know how many will class as headliners or, you know, hopefully we get a surprise or two. I think that's usually the best case scenario.
I'll tell you what, I'm watching regardless. I don't have anything else to do.
Watch James Duthie tap dance out there or what?
Wow. If he's doing that, then the ratings are going through the roof. Nice. Love you, James Duthie. Okay, since that's enough out of you with trade stuff, you know, we got to save the juice for the next few days. How about Gary Bettman in Winnipeg? The NHL commissioner making an appearance in that city. I believe someone had an interview with Mark Chipman a couple days ago. Do you know who that was?
It was me.
Yeah, we know that. Some really interesting comments from Bettman. Pretty positive about the situation in Winnipeg. One quote that I'll read for you here. I think there was a lot of speculation as to why I was here today. This is a place where hockey matters. I believe that this is a strong NHL market. I believe that ownership has made extraordinary commitments to the Jets, to this arena, and to the downtown area involving hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not sure why people are speculating that somehow the NHL is not going to be here. So yeah, positive, but also kind of interesting. It felt like there was a jab in there at the media speculation.
Well, I mean,
but of course,
that's what we expect from the commissioner. I'll say, look, if you take his quote at face value, he's totally right. Winnipeg is a great hockey market. It is a place where hockey matters. It's a place that they've proven they love their team. All those things are true. That doesn't change the fact that you still have ownership, you know, mentioning quite openly that they're having struggles selling tickets, and that could bring about challenges over the long term if it doesn't change. And so obviously I stand by my story. I mean, I quoted the owner of the team. Quite extensively in that piece, you know, but this is like, it's so funny. You want to, of course, you want to be ahead on a story like that. Like that, I'm not going to lie, that really worked out well on a personal level, but it's kind of weird when you're ahead of a story like that, because then there's this whole wave of reaction that comes after it. Then you have Bettman. It's like, he's like the second wave of reaction. You're like, are they all subtweeting the original story now? Are they trying to chip away at its validity? I think Bettman did the right thing though. Like, there's no sense coming in there and issuing any threats. Clearly that market, and I think understandably, I'm not saying this as a criticism, is sensitive to anything that might be interpreted as a threat that the team could leave again. And nowhere in my story did I say that they could leave again. I really only said it's pretty high up, but if this doesn't change, then we get to the position where you have to wonder if those conditions come into place. But there's no like timelines put in place, no suggestion in the next year or two or anything like that. I don't think that this is full out crisis or anything, but you're probably one or two steps before the crisis if things don't change. So the good news is the Jets have won on the ice since that was published a couple of games. They're still in a great spot in the standings, and I think they still have a chance to have a nice playoff run, or maybe even a really long playoff run. And if all those things tend to, the ticket sales tend to take care of themselves with the teams having that level of success. So, we'll just have to see where it goes from there. But I thought the commissioner, it's scary. Like, I don't take any of that personally. If that's what I don't know if you're kind of getting at that or what.
No. I was not going. Well, it's funny. Like it's funny that I read the quote the way that I did, because the one part of the quote that's gone around a lot is the part where he says hockey matters and it's a strong NHL market. The extra stuff about the speculation that hasn't been out there as much, but I wasn't reading it to suggest that you have beef with Gary. I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to read the quote that we put up at the Athletic.
This is all the game, right? This is the whole game.
It's the game.
These are the playing rules. If you step on the field with Gary as a reporter, you might get, stepped on a little bit.
Oh man.
He likes correcting. He hates narratives. He likes correcting things in a way that suits his vision. I mean, I actually have come to appreciate the back and forth with Bettman. Like, I like those press conferences, but I've grown up. He's been the commissioner my entire time as a reporter, so it's a long time, and I appreciate it.
Do we have any insight on how his talks with corporate sponsors went, or anything else to come with Winnipeg and the Jets?
Not a whole lot, but I do think that was an important part of the visit. Is the Jets are drawing from not only the smallest ticket buying fan base because they live in the smallest city, but they don't have the same corporate base as a lot of other places. And so I think it's important they look after their sponsors. I know they're really grateful for Canada Life, which recently is, taken over the branding name of the arena. It's got a big building right beside a big corporate building right beside where the Jets play. And so, it's a chance, I think, for the NHL to show its appreciation for those people too, because, this is the business of hockey is still, a lot of it is still on boots on the ground type of stuff, right? It's not all, it's a little different than the NFL or some of these other sports. And so I don't have any specific takeaways from that other than, I think that it's something he does in every market. I saw Gary actually was in Columbus yesterday. I'm sure he's meeting sponsors there. I mean, that's part of what you do. I thought it was interesting. Actually, one thing that's come out since my story is the Jets have even had a few players meet with former season ticket holders in addition to just Mark Chipman's calls. And so, and Josh Morrissey spoke pretty eloquently on that. I mean, just shows to me the level that they're taking it seriously, that they're trying to change maybe whatever didn't work in the past, that they're trying to show a level of humility in the community, and that they're out there, they're hustling, man. I mean, the tickets don't sell themselves. I think we've learned that much, that much is evident. And so I applaud them for those efforts. And I don't think many people had the Jets being where they are right now in the standings. And I know producer Drew might disagree, but maybe they could even win the Central. It's not impossible. I mean, it's one of Colorado, Dallas, or Winnipeg, I think, ends up on top of that division. So, they've had a really good year there on the ice, despite some of their off ice challenges.
Producer Drew, we still haven't had any of our producers actually hop into the show and we hear their disembodied voice, but producer Drew's a big fan of the chat feature that we use. And he just wrote boo at the suggestion of the Jets somehow being better than his beloved Colorado Avalanche.
I'm still wondering about Landeskog.
Yeah. Well, what about Landeskog? I mean, we know he's
if we
injured.
see him play in the playoffs. You know, I checked in on this a couple days ago. It sounds like there's really no timeline, but you have to know. I mean, he's back skating. He had very serious knee surgery last year in the spring. And the fact it hasn't been ruled out that he could return at some point in the playoffs is interesting. Doesn't mean he's in, but it doesn't mean he's out. And you know the way players are. And the unfortunate nature of the surgery he had is that everything can go great. And if he has like one setback, like it's almost back to square one. So obviously they have to be very careful with him. He has to be careful. They've got a lot invested in the player. He hasn't played since they won the Stanley Cup that night in Tampa, believe it or not. But just bringing him back in, even if he's just kind of not his full self after that kind of layoff, I think could be such a boost to a team that obviously has got huge horses and has the firepower to win the Stanley Cup again.
Okay, something to keep an eye out for the Colorado Avalanche. Producer Drew will love that tidbit. Any thoughts on the PWHl, what they announced yesterday? Their rules for the playoffs, the top 4 teams in regular season making it, but the first place team has a 24-hour window to select its semifinal opponent. That's for playoffs. And then for tanking, they're using the gold plan, in which the first overall pick will go to the team that gets the most points after being eliminated from playoff contention.
I love that they're trying different things, and I have no issue with either concept. I mean, the one thing about their gold plan, and this isn't their fault, but it's not as in a league where 4 out of the 6 teams make the playoffs. Really what you're talking about is between the last 2, the 5th and 6th place teams, which plays best down the stretch after being eliminated is going to get the first overall pick. So it's really only competition between 2 teams in a league that small. I think it'd be far more effective and fascinating in a league like the NHL, where obviously half the teams don't qualify for the playoffs. And so I think it would really give those fan bases something to rally around. But that's the idea, is it keeps the games mattering. It keeps the fans engaged in those markets. I mean, if you're a fan of the Sharks right now, or the Ducks or the Blackhawks, I mean, what are you hoping for? You're probably hoping for losses on some way because you're hoping for luck in the draft lottery. And so, if the league used that kind of system, I think it would be interesting. And then when it comes to picking your playoff opponent, I love it. I don't see the downside at all, quite frankly. I see that maybe a feelings could be hurt, or it's bulletin board material, but I think that's all great. And I noticed your call out on social media yesterday, Julian, about televising the selections. I mean, it would be a quick show for one team to pick its opponent, but it would be kind of cool if they did it live. I don't know how they intend to do that, but basically you're picking between the 3rd or 4th place team. Which one have you had more success about? Which is better travel? Whatever it is, it just adds more spice right to that series before it's even a game's been played.
Even if it's a short broadcast, just having a team representative there, maybe a player from that team there. I just think it would be a good way to put more names to faces when it comes to the league. I think that'd be a cool idea.
It'd be awesome. So yeah, I applaud. I mean, I've been very supportive of the PWHL. I think that they've hit all the right notes in their first year. I think that, given that the league was kind of thrown together in a matter of months and it's gone as well as you could hope, the games have been competitive. And I think these are both, like, I love that they have the power kill. In fact, there was one last night. Ottawa scored a shorthanded goal in its game, and it means the player comes out of the penalty box. So you not only get the goal, but you stop having to kill a penalty. All these are things that perhaps we'll see go into other professional leagues, men's or women's. I think that if you're going to launch a new league, it's a blank slate. So why wouldn't you try new things? And the beauty is, if any of them don't hit right for whatever reason, you can adjust in year 2 or 3 or 4. And I don't think anyone's going to be like, well, it's always been done this way. They're going to be like, yeah, we tried it and it didn't work. And so I think sometimes when you're a more established league, you're almost, you're locked into like a rigid way of thinking, a rigid way of doing things. Whereas one of the benefits the PWHL has is the teams don't even have nicknames yet. I mean, nothing's sorted. The trophy they're competing for at the end of this season, it still doesn't have a name yet. And so, and as I don't say that as, I think that can be a feature, not a bug. Like, I think that it gives them the ability to do what they need to do to try to make it the most compelling entertainment product possible, which is really at the end of the day, what they're trying to achieve.
Well said. And I would think that everyone at the SDPN is a fan of the PWHL. At the very least on this show, big fans of the league, and still waiting on a franchise to pop up in the city I reside in now. There's one
That's
in my
going
home
to take
city
a while.
I would love
bud.
a PWHL franchise. It's going to take a
Just
while.
because
I
of
know,
the
but
logistics and costs and things like that. It's
Yeah.
not because Calgary would be a poor market. It's just I think it's got to be kind of a regional league to start for it to make sense.
yeah. But when I get back to Montreal, I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to be back by the time the season ends, but I would still love to go to a game. Anyway, stick taps before we wrap up today's episode of the CJ Show. Do you have one?
You start. I have not thought of one at all. Dog ate my
we could
homework.
Probably share this. Oh no! Don't give me. How many times have you given that excuse in your life?
Not much. I was a diligent student, believe it or not, back in the day.
Yes, I believe that. Did you have a dog? Are you a pet person?
I am. I haven't had a dog as an adult, but as a kid, we had a childhood dog for many, many years, from like when I was in grade school right through to university.
What was your dog's name? Tell us about your dog.
Digger the dog. We got her from the pound. The reason she was called Digger is because when we got her, she had a scab on her nose because she had tried to dig out under the fence to escape the pound and got caught. And
oh wow,
she was a pretty mangy dog when we got her. Obviously, had been a stray, but was a huge part of our family growing up. And still pictures in my dad's living room of Digger. So part of the family always. And yeah, I just, the way my career has been, and same, like I've traveled so much, I've just never had a chance. I lived in a condo for years where, it's not as conducive to owning pets. And being away so much, I haven't had a chance to own a dog, but I could see a world in the future. I could see a future CJ getting a dog. I don't really appreciate cats, if I'm being honest. But I'd certainly get a dog down the road.
If you got yourself a dog, would you allow the SDPN community to name it?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's not happening next week or even next year. So
no, but there's in the distant future, maybe.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
I'm down for that.
Okay. All right. Stick tap time.
You're doing the first one.
I'll show some love to Helen Elliott, who had her last day at the LA Times.
Helene Elliott
this week. Oh, Helene. Sorry, my bad.
I just want to make sure we got it right.
I apologize. No, but I'm glad that we have that right. Helene Elliott, 47 years in the business, 34 years at the LA Times, covering a whole bunch of different sports, obviously known in the hockey community. Just wanted to pass along some stick taps to her on a great career. That would be my pick, CJ.
Man, I better second that one. 47 years is quite a run. I don't know if you had a chance to read her farewell column. It was pretty heartbreaking.
I did, actually. It was really
talking
well
about
done.
her and her husband's plans for retiring, and unfortunately her husband died of a heart attack in the last year, and she was planning to cover the Paris games, and she just basically said, you make plans and God laughs. So all the best to Helene. Spent a lot of time in press boxes with her around the league, and hope retirement treats her well. I mean, 47 years is a long run. I can't even imagine retiring. Like I'm obviously not at the age where you would, but like you start to think about it, like part of your first part of your career, just like I need a job and I need to establish myself. And then you're like, how the decision to retire must be very difficult for a lot of people.
If you're able to do it
versus being fired.
Well, I don't know. Isn't the whole thing in at least with millennials, it's like, oh, are we going to make enough money through the jobs that we do to retire? Like, I don't know. Is that what I have to worry about? Siege?
I don't know. I didn't know that was the whole thing for millennials, but
it might be more for people, because I'm at the younger end of the millennial generation. You're at the older end.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, but yeah, I'm just saying, like, if you get to that age where you still kind of love it, but you see where the industry's going, you maybe see that, she mentioned in her column too, her decision to take a buyout from the LA Times resulted in another writer being able to keep his job. So, you get into that situation, pretty selfless decision, because man, this beats working for a living. I will say that.
Yeah,
it really does.
Tell you that, man.
And Helene embodied that.
Absolutely.
And she's in the Hockey Hall of Fame and the writers division of that as well, and covered tons of other sports. And I got a lot of flowers out there in the last week or two.
All right. So on behalf of CJ and myself, we salute you, Helene Elliott, on a fantastic sports writing career. And since we're sharing this, that means we have just the one stick tap, which means that's going to do it for our Thursday edition of the CJ Show. Well done, sir. Hopefully you're able to get whatever rest you can get ahead of a busy final stretch ahead of the NHL trade deadline.
I'm ready. I'm locked and loaded, focused. It's going to be a busy 10 days here, but I'm ready for it.
All right, I'm ready for it too. Be sure to check out CJ's coverage at The Athletic, my coverage at The Athletic as well. Subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to the SDPN YouTube channel. We'll be back on Monday, everybody. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.